We're going to get started, and I just want to welcome you all to the webinar called Build a Team That Takes Ownership. My name is Kyle Hunt. I'm the moderator. I've got the easy job. I'm going to be managing the chat box. We love the interaction. We love for you to share, whether it's questions as you go. I'll be kind of managing those. If there's an opportunity to ask Vicki during the presentation, we may do that, but most likely I'll save them for the end. But please get active in there. The other thing we'd love is just share some of your takeaways. I think whenever you invest time in coming on to a webinar like this, your valuable time, something that we always want to focus on is actually going away from it with key things that you're actually going to implement into your business. So that's another thing that I'd love to see. We'd love to see in the chat box is just some of your takeaways as you go through things. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I'll be managing that. And I just want to introduce Vicki. I'm not a huge guy into like, here's the bio, like that specific speaker bio. So I'm just going to kind of tell a story of Vicki and what I know about her. I think it's important as business owners that we get to know other colleagues, other business owners who are doing similar things as you. And Vicki and I, through Diane Gilson and some other names that I see on the webinar, were introduced to each other. And it's just one of those things that when you get connected to somebody that has that similar outlook, similar desire to help one another, it just kind of clicks. And Vicki and I clicked pretty well, and we've been able to become not only colleagues, but friends here recently. And from a business standpoint, we had the opportunity a few months ago back in January to get our mastermind group together in Phoenix. And I think what kind of summarizes it, this was the first time I was kind of able to see Vicki in person and kind of in action. And I can't remember who was talking, but it was probably the fourth time or so that I was just kind of sitting there going, man, that's smart. And I literally turned to Jolene Emery, who was sitting next to me, and I'm like, she's so smart, Jolene. Like, and just there's this clarity that Vicki, through her experience, through her knowledge, is able to bring to complex topics. And this topic of how to manage people, is there a more complex topic than that? It is so imperative as business leaders, as business owners, as managers, that we get better tools to manage better. It's so critical to being more profitable, to being able to delegate all of these things that you guys are mentioning and some of the reasons you're here. So that's my introduction of you, Vicki. I'm going to let you kind of take over and share your screen and lead things.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. So a few little logistic things, and thank you for that introduction. I will reiterate something that Kyle said, is our mastermind group is an amazing opportunity for us to share with like-minded business owners who are facing some of the same, growth and challenges that we face as business owners. So he's been a lot of fun to learn from and to grow with too. So thank you. And thanks for being the host. So Kyle, as you said, is going to be tracking what's going on in the chat, and I'm going to be focusing on presenting. But if you have questions as we're going along, make sure to type them in the chat, and he'll keep track of them. He may interrupt me sometimes while we're going along, but I'm going to go through all of the course material. And while I do that, I'm going to turn off my video, and I'm just going to share my screen. And when I do that, I may pop back and forth a few times where I actually just have me on the screen and not my PowerPoint presentation. The reason I'm going to turn off my video for some of the time is it helps with the bandwidth, and then you'll make sure that you get a better quality experience in terms of the transmission of the webinar. So we're going to jump in.
Awesome.
We'll get the PowerPoint up here.
It's like a go for launch sequence. We got the video changed, we got the screen shared,
and here
just
we
about
go.
Ready for launch, folks.
Okay, there we go.
Excellent.
All right, so in today's webinar, we're going to talk about this whole subject of how do you get your team to take ownership. And I'm going to show you there are 3 ways to build a team that takes ownership without manipulation or financial incentives. And before we begin, I just have a favor I want to ask of you, because one of the things is that in an environment like this where we're learning on a webinar, it's easy for us to get distracted. And I'm going to really cover a lot of ground here in this webinar. I want to make sure that you leave here with a huge amount of value. So I want to make sure that you get everything that's available for you in our time together. And for this reason, I'd like to ask you to just do a few things, if you would, please. Would you turn off your cell phone? Shut down your emails, social media, and really just let's be present together. My promise to you is that when you're finished, you'll have the tools that will help you get your team to take more ownership. And you and I both know that commitments are a 2-way thing. And so I'm committing to you, and I'm just asking, would you commit to me that you will do the same thing? So if you would just pop into the chat what your commitment is, if you're willing to do that with me. Are you willing to just be completely present, be here, shut everything else down, and get what there is here for you to get in this next hour? Walt says, sure, awesome.
That's on board.
Let's see, Cynthia says, absolutely. Great, done, I'm willing, I'm in, let's do it. All right, awesome, great, good, thanks you guys, nice, sure. Let's see, Chad says, yes, I'm in. All right, let's get it going. Thanks, guys. So let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself having the experience or feeling like it's hard to get people to take ownership, right? That's obviously why why you're here. And then does it seem like you tell someone to do something? Have you ever had that experience? You tell somebody to do something, but they don't seem to retain what it is that you've told them to do, which can be super frustrating. And do you ever wonder why people don't follow through? You ever had that experience where you have an agreement with somebody and they say that they're going to do something and then they don't do it, or you tell somebody to do something and then they don't do it? So can anybody relate to that? Again, just pop something into the chat if you can relate to that and you've had any of those experiences. Brian says yes. Anyone else, can you relate to that? Yeah, often. Cody says too often. Rachel says all the time, every day. Yeah, it's super frustrating, isn't it? Yeah, Chad says way too often. So what we're going to talk about is how do you actually change that experience? And what's interesting is I did a survey and 65% of the managers said that they want people to take more ownership. So you guys aren't alone, right? Like a lot of people really struggle with this whole thing of how to have our teams just be more responsible, to create a culture where people act more like partners than helpers with us in our business and really own results. And what was also interesting is 45% of managers that I surveyed said that they wish they were just better at managing people. And managing people feels hard. A lot of times it feels like babysitting. And it can be tough to get people to be accountable for ownership. And let's face it, a lot of leaders, in an effort to try to control results, end up micromanaging their staff, which you could probably relate to this too. It's exhausting. And when you shift your focus from controlling and trying to control tasks to managing for results, you're going to find that your challenges as a leader will be completely transformed. People will raise up to take a different level of ownership in completely new ways, and managing will actually get easier. So I'm just going to say that again, because this is really a key to what we're going to be talking about today. When you can shift your focus from controlling tasks to managing for results, then your challenges as a leader is going to become much more, you will find much relief in your ability to manage people. And you're going to find that you're going to be more confident, and your team is going to raise up to a completely different level of engagement with you in the organization. And that's really what the focus, I'm going to share with you 3 of the key ways today that you can start to make that shift within your company. So let me just ask you, would you want to know the secret to having people take more ownership? Yep, pretty sure you do. That's why you're here. And would you like to get more consistent results from people? We heard a lot of that in the chat from people. And wouldn't it be great to have people follow through on their agreements? Again, these are some of the things that I just heard you say, we just heard you say, are some of the struggles that you have faced and that you are facing, and part of the reason why you're here. And so I'm going to jump in just a second and share with you what are the ways that you can change all of that. But one of the things that I, is when I teach, I always think, it's good for people to know something about you, and why do I get to tell this story? Like, did I just wake up one day and I was a great manager and a leader? And the answer is absolutely not. My early years as a manager were painful. And I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn on my video, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And I just want to share this story with you because I really struggled when I first started managing people. And I found it very difficult to get people to produce consistent results. And I felt like I was constantly micromanaging. And in that process of micromanaging people, I really resented them. And that didn't help the situation at all. And when I left that job and I started my own business in 1990, I was kind of relieved because I'm like, oh, I don't have any more employees. It's all going to be good. Except that in 1994, I found myself really needing to hire somebody. And I kind of dreaded it, but the truth was I was working 60 hours a week. I was a mom of a young child. My marriage had seriously been suffering as a result of all the hours that I was working. And unfortunately for my husband, he was like third down the list of my priorities. And I was exhausted. And I thought, I've got to do something and I've got to make a change. And I went, okay, put on your big girl pants and you got to hire somebody and you're going to have to figure out how to make this work. So I did, and I made this whole task list of, all these things that I wanted somebody to do. And the truth was that was a little challenging for me too, because what I knew how to do with clients at that point was a lot of what I've learned through the School of Hard Knocks. I hadn't gone through some major education or training to learn what I'd learned. I had made a ton of mistakes to learn what I'd learned. And then I was sharing that learning with the people that I was working with. But I wasn't even sure how to get somebody to do what I was doing, but I knew I had to try. And so, I made the whole list of all these tasks, and I went like, what are the skills somebody needs? And so I wrote this position agreement and posted it and interviewed a bunch of people, and then I hired Beth. And, we spent time training and orienting her, took her to the clients, so on and so forth. And within, I sent her off on her own. And within not too many weeks after she was out there on her own, I started getting some calls from clients. Things like, hey, Beth doesn't ask the kind of questions that you ask. Are you sure she knows what she's doing? And things like, I asked Beth a question. I asked her for some advice, but the advice she gave me was wrong, and now I got to go have somebody else fix it. And it just like kind of calls like that. And I was like, oh, I thought she doesn't have the experience that she said she had. And the other thing that I felt like at that moment was she had the potential of my looking bad with my clients and people going away and my clients going away. So in addition to sort of like the frustration of she just wasn't getting her job done, honestly, it like triggered all these things in me about my fear of looking bad, my fear of clients going away, my fear of my livelihood being adversely affected by her performance. And it was around that time when I was kind of struggling with all of that I happened to have picked up the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And for any of you who have ever read the book, it's an amazing book, but it was like reading the book, I had like one of these aha moments where I was like, oh, the problem is not Beth. Because the truth is, you know, this wasn't the first time that I had ever had this experience of having to micromanage somebody. You know, in my effort to overcome some of these challenges with her that I had been having, I increased the amount of detail that I was giving her of things that she had to check. And then I had increased the amount of time that I was spending with her in order to make sure that she was doing everything right. And what I found was I wasn't getting any more time in my life. I was still exhausted. And it was like, why am I doing this at all? And it was when I was reading this book and then I realized, okay, you know, here you are, you're back in that same situation again where you're micromanaging somebody. What's your problem? Because I kind of live by the philosophy of, if you have a problem once with somebody, could be their fault. If I keep having the same problem with multiple people, it's probably my problem. And I knew I needed to fix something. And I knew at that point that I was at a choice where I had to either decide, am I going to continue to work the way I'm working, which I couldn't because my family was suffering, my life was suffering, my health started to suffer, or was I going to go get a job working for someone else and let go of all of this and just, you know, be a one person, only depend on me? Or was I going to continue to have my business and have to figure out how to become a better manager? And I chose option number 3. And that started me on a journey of learning from some of the great thought leaders and teachers and trainers out there on the subject of management and leadership, because I really wanted to crack the code on, how do I have this turn out better? And so part of what I'm going to share with you today in this webinar on how to get your team to take more ownership is going to be what I implemented in my own business and what I've been implementing with and helping clients implement in their business for over 25 years. And I will tell you, it completely transformed. It was one of the most transformational personal things that I have done as a manager and a leader, but as a person, because it really changed the way I thought about teams and people. And I shifted the way that I started to engage in ways that were hugely powerful, that made a difference in partly how my relationship went with Beth, which I'll tell you more about as we go along today, but also in my ability to support clients in getting past the struggle that they were facing in their business as well. Because for me, you know, I do the work that I do because I am committed to helping people grow, thrive, and prosper. And in your ability to grow, thrive, and prosper means that you have to have the ability to be able to make a good living, which means you probably need some support from people working with you. It's true for everybody on the line, I'm pretty sure, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It also requires the ability to be able to have a life. When I say thrive, that you have a life that you can live, that you can enjoy, and that you can not have to be tethered to your business or your job all the time, but you have the ability to be able to love what you do again. And again, I'm going to share some stories as we go along today of clients that have completely transformed their experiences as well and have rediscovered the love of what they do, which is, for me, that's like the greatest gift that I could give somebody. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to share with you what I did. And then as we go along, like I said, I'll tell you how I applied this with Beth as well. By the way, before I do that, just a quick check-in. How many of you on the line can relate to my story? How many of you have had that experience where you have felt like you've been working tons of hours? Yeah, so Nancy, definitely I'm living it.
And then Vicki, I think we might be seeing your slide, your screen that kind of shows the next slide coming up versus the full slides.
Oh, you're showing the wrong one. Okay. Let me share the right one.
And Nancy's a client of mine. When she says I'm living it now, she is. Perfect. That's working.
Okay. Yeah, you saw my cheat notes too about tell my story.
It's all right.
Yeah, long hours. Cody says long hours and micromanaging have become the norm. Yeah, and you know what? And I got to tell you, it just doesn't have to be that way. Okay. Thanks, Kyle. So here's one of the very first things that you want to consider doing. And this was one of the things that I found was really the key that made the difference, and was where I started in that training to learn what my problem was with what I was doing with Beth. So I got really clear that there was a distinction between task versus results. I'm going to turn off my camera again here. There, we'll be able to get a better connection that way. So the distinction of task versus results, when I was working with Beth, what I saw was, sorry, jumped ahead there. I had given her this list of all these tasks to do, but I didn't actually hold her accountable for the results that she needed to produce. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So before I do though, let me just ask you a question. How many of you, I'll take off my camera again, how many of you have ever played Monopoly? You can type it into the chat if you want. Most of us have, right? We grew up learning how to play Monopoly. And you know, when you first learn how to play Monopoly, they teach you that you get a little, you know, little shoe or something, right? And then you roll the dice, you move a certain number of spaces around the board. If you stop on a chance, you pick up a card. When you pass go, you collect $200, you buy property, and then whoever has the most amount of money at the end wins. And I don't know about you, but when I first started learning how to play Monopoly, I had 3 older brothers. I lost a lot of games of Monopoly. I couldn't win for years. And then one day, I think it was my oldest brother felt pity on me. And he finally said, listen, let me teach you the strategy of how to win a game. And when he taught me how to do the strategy, right? So when somebody teaches us a strategy about Monopoly, all of a sudden we're playing a game where we understand that you want to have by the number of, most number of houses to collect the most amount of rent. And Boardwalk and Park Place are the places where they have the highest rent. And that when you own all 4 railroads, you're going to increase your rent, right? So those are all the strategies that are going to help you actually end up with the most amount of money and win. Well, position agreements with your team is exactly the same kind of thing. So position agreements are all about helping you define the strategy with them for being able to win the game. So let's break that down a little bit. So a clearly defined, and I call them position agreements, interchangeably with job descriptions. And I do that because job descriptions are a term that a lot of people know, but position agreements are where you have an agreement with somebody about a result and the results that they're going to produce in that job. And when done well, just like when you're learning like the game of Monopoly, right? You're setting up a win-win with your team and there's a measurable and objective results. You're clearer when you have that strategy about how to win. And when you do it, it's an outline that lets you be clear. I actually just talked about this, that you're clear about how to win the game together. So there are 3 elements to a great position agreement when it's written. It speaks to specific results, not tasks. It has measurable standards and it's agreed upon. So let's talk about, I'm actually going to share something else here on my screen where I want to show you a sample of a job description. So this is a position agreement for a project manager. And so I want to just make the distinction of what do I mean by specific and measurable results. So in the way I write position agreements, there's 4 basic sections to it. So your first one kind of is your overall, what's the primary function of that job? The second one is what are the major responsibilities? So major responsibilities speak to what are the major areas of accountability for that person. I recommend that you only have 5 to 7 of these when you're writing a position agreement. This is one of the things that keeps you from writing a task list. So when I was working with Beth, you may have noticed that I said, you know, when I hired her, I had written down this whole list of all these things I wanted her to do. So an important distinction that you want to keep in mind is that the purpose of the job description is not to explain process. and it's not to explain task, because process and task belongs on an internal procedure. But your job description, your position agreement really you want it to speak to what do you want that person to own in that job that they're going to be accountable for. I'm going to flash back on my camera for a second. So when I talk about what's the major responsibilities, these are like sort of the big chunk. What are the big chunk items that that person is accountable for in that job? So in the case of a project manager, they're accountable. So like their fundamental job is on time, on budget as promised, right? So everything under major responsibilities at some level speaks to that, including that they're accountable for daily field communication. So they're responsible for the field staff and communication with the client, managing and controlling project costs. So that has to do with budget, and initiates and runs biweekly production meetings, right? So their job is to keep it when it's on time, on budget, on time, as promised. That production schedule relates to keeping it on schedule and in a time and finished within the agreed upon time frame. And yes, I do understand for everybody whose mind just went to project schedules never happen on on time, but they're a guide, right? And they are hugely important in terms of being a guide to being able to help that person operate from managing for a result versus a task. And so one of the ways I think about this is that you're managing for results from what I call 30,000 feet. You want your team, particularly your managers, you want your team to be understanding what are the most important things that they have to focus on to keep their finger on the pulse of their of what's going on in their job in order to be able to be most successful, right? And so there's a lot of tasks and things that we all do, but there are the critical things that we do that really drive our success. And so a well-written position agreement really helps define that for somebody. So that's why I say you want to keep it to 5 to 7, because if it's a whole laundry list, it's probably more of a task list than a major responsibility. I'm going to skip over skills and experience because that's kind of self-evident. And then I'm going to go down to this section called objectives and results. So objectives and results is all about how do you answer the question for each major responsibility, how will I know it got done? So this should be something that's measurable and objective that you or your team member can be able to see and look at and evaluate and know, did they actually get that done? So an objective and result in this case, we've got maintains open daily communication with the staff and the client. Field reports are completed daily. It's specific and it's measurable. Labor is prepared with the proper materials to accompany the daily, to accomplish the day's work by 8 a.m. It's specific and it's measurable, right? So the more specific they are in here, as a result, then the more likely that person is going to be to know even how to go from there's a million things I have to do to what are the most important things I have to do. So one of the things that you'll find is a position agreement written like this increases your ability for your team to take ownership exponentially, because now you're going to define for them what specifically are the most important things for them to pay attention to. Again, remember, I'm talking about what are the most critical elements that they need to focus on that are going to support them in being successful in their job. And I just want to throw something in here too, which is I fundamentally believe and know from all the study and all the work that I've done on studying human beings and how we operate, that fundamentally everybody on our team wants to win. Our team wants to be successful and they fundamentally want to do a good job. And they want to have a feeling that what they do matters and has a contribution, and they want to do well. And a lot of times it's like we kind of miss the mark in thinking that they don't really care, or that they're lazy, or that they're not, they're not something. And what I contend is that if we as leaders and as managers get better at helping define these kind of things for people that help them understand how to go from I have all these things to manage to what are the most important things for me to manage. You will help them become more successful in their job. They will take more ownership, and they will be a more proactive part of your team in creating consistent results. So a few things about objectives and results when you're writing the position agreements is, again, the question is, how will I know it got done, right? So I got a major responsibility, which is each one of these 1, 2, 3 is from the top section of the position agreement. And then under objectives and results, I'm answering the question, how will I know it got done? You want to keep it to no more than 3 to 5. So that's a way to be able to go from, well, there's lots of things they're responsible for, to making us focus more on what are the most important things, so that we're not operating at the level of task and detail, but we're operating at the level of results. So this is really a key to getting your team to take ownership, because this is where you start to define with them how to be able to win the game with you and how to have a strategy for being able to be successful. Okay, I'm going to minimize that back, and we're going to go back to my PowerPoint. So I'm going to turn off my camera. So here's the next point about this, and you can see this on here, is that it's agreed upon. So this is a really important element of being able to get people to take ownership. But I guess before I jump there, can you guys relate to the distinction? Maybe throw something in the chat. Can you relate to the distinction? Doesn't that make sense to you, that if you start managing people by results versus task, that's a way for you to have them actually own more and take more ownership and responsibility? Just throw a note in the chat. Yeah, so Blake says yes. Completely, says Tony, or Troy. Sorry, Troy.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Jack says yes. Yeah. Walt says yes. I agree. Yeah, so it can make all the difference in the world when you can start to think of that way, because it really will help them start to self-manage much more effectively, because they're clear about what are the most important things that I got to pay attention to up here. The next piece is getting buy-in and collaboration with your team. And this piece is where you're going to take that position agreement. So when you write a position agreement, you'll do the first version of it. And by the way, position agreements are by position, not by person. So this is another key thing, is that a lot of times, like, people get tripped up and they want to write them by person. I had a client that I worked with several years ago, and when we first started working together, he had these position agreements that were really more like task lists, but everybody worked as a quote-unquote team together. And the challenging part was that he had gotten stuck at this level of not being able to get past $2 million in revenue. And as soon as he would go to like 2.5, he would become completely overwhelmed, and then he would get distracted and he'd be putting out fires all the time, and then revenue would slip back, and he couldn't, and it was kind of this constant back and forth with his revenues. And that's why he came to me. He said, I'm really struggling. I got a great team, but I just can't seem to get them beyond to the next level so that they can own the next piece so that I can grow my business. And his name was Paul. And I said, Paul, let's take a look, tell me a little bit about what your team is doing. And we, did some interviews with this team and stuff and learned some things. And as we were talking, what I realized is what he had done is everybody's job sort of morphed and shifted based on whatever project they were working on, or, there was this lack of clarity because he had these very talented people who could wear a lot of hats, but they were not clear about what were the results for them to be accountable for whenever they were working on any particular project. And so when he did this with his team, we implemented new position agreements. We assigned an organizational chart, got all the positions in place, and then he defined who was in each of those positions. And then he implemented the position agreements with his team, which I'm going to talk about what he did next, which was that he got agreement and buy-in with them. He had them look at each of those position agreements and say, hey, you know, what input do you have? What thoughts do you have? Am I on track here? So he wrote the first version, but then he had them look at it and give input and recommendations. At the same time that he did it, he also upped the ante for every position in his company. So when I say he upped the ante, he looked at it and said, hey, we're going to implement these new standards because we're missing standards here and we don't have the ability to manage from the big picture. So we're going to set in some standards for results that need to be produced. And that's one of the great things that I've seen happens a lot in this exercise when people implement position agreements, is that you'll when I say you want to be specific and measurable in terms of results, it will have you start to define what some of those standards are for your business, which is going to be the thing that's going to raise it up to the whole new level. And as he did it with his team, you know, at first he was a little concerned because he was like, you know, what if they kind of push back? What if they don't want to, you know, they won't agree to it? And I said, you know, just give them an opportunity to have input into it. And he did. And as he did, his entire team, it was so funny. I was even getting phone calls from people. They were like, oh, we're so grateful to understand how to win the game with you. And my words, not theirs. But we are so grateful and so glad to understand how to be successful in our jobs and what are the results that we need to produce. Now we've got something that we're working towards and that we can own and that we can take responsibility for. And they were so grateful for it. And this whole thing of taking ownership, sometimes our problem as managers and leaders, and what was my problem with Beth, is I treated her more like a helper than somebody accountable for a result. Paul's problem with his team was it was this great group of people, but he was in the middle of all of it, and he had not let them own the result themselves. A little fast forward on that company, he ended up growing that following year to $3 million and has continued to grow every year since. And what was so cool is a couple months ago, he sent me an email and he goes, I just got to tell you, he says, I am having more fun in my business than I've ever had. I am able to be away from it. My team is managing it and they're doing an amazing job. Now, that didn't happen overnight, right? That's been a few years that he kept working it, but what he did is he learned to manage from results from the top down versus the particles up from his team. And as he implemented the position agreements, he got agreement with them to own that position agreement. And the last piece of the getting agreement, right? So he had them review it, he had them take a look at it, and he had them then sign off on that position agreement. So he got their input so that they were clear, so that they had an opportunity to contribute. And then he literally had them sign it. And this is what you want to do with position agreements, is you want to have your team sign it, because what it does, position agreements that are signed are a little bit like contracts. When you have contracts, this is the second piece that's a key distinction, this whole buy-in and agreement piece, that when you have contracts, you manage to those contracts with your clients, right? Well, a position agreement where you have agreement where you've signed it is just like a contract that you have with a client. It becomes like a third party set of criteria for how you're going to evaluate how well that person is doing or not. And so that gives you and them an opportunity to have something that's objective to manage against, so that when you're having feedback conversations, doing reviews with people, so that when you're giving someone feedback about performance, just like on the fly, that you're managing to, hey, we have this agreement. It's not, I like you, I don't like you. And so that's really a cool way to be able to start to shift your culture to one of ownership, because you both own that agreement that you made with each other. That's a total game changer right there. Does that make sense? You guys, are you seeing that? Are you seeing, just type something into the chat. Are you seeing how like that can really start to shift that relationship? Yeah, so Michael says yes. Brian says yes. Walt says yes. Yes, definitely, says Nancy. Yeah, because it shifts it to being where you're starting to operate from an agreement with each other versus an expectation and versus sort of this vague list of tasks, right? You now narrowed it down and you've got an agreement. Those are two hugely powerful ways. Yeah, Dan says light bulb moment. Those are two huge powerful ways for you to be able to start to get your team to take ownership and really own and be accountable for results within their job. So the third key element is getting and keeping agreement. So at the beginning, some of you were putting in the chat that it's really tough to get people to keep agreements. It's super frustrating, and we've all been there. And one of the things that I found is a really great strategy for overcoming that is to implement a management system for managing agreements. And I have something that's called SMART goals. Probably a lot of you have heard of this. But when you make agreements based on SMART goals, you're going to find that your ability to get people to take ownership is going to increase quite a bit, because you're just going to start to build a culture where you start to manage and keep agreements that are more specific with each other than general. So let's just go through these. So there's specific, so it's what specifically is going to happen, that it's measurable, that it happened or not, that there's clear accountability for it, it's realistic, and it's time driven. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're working with a subcontractor, and that subcontractor needs to get you a change order. And that subcontractor says, so there are a couple options. You go to say to the subcontractor, hey, will you get me that change? You know, you're about to leave a site meeting. The subcontractor says, yeah, I'll get that change to you. We've all been there, right? And then you're like, gosh, I hope it gets here in time. Or like in the back of your head, you're like, oh, is it gonna get here when I need it? I gotta get that change to the client. You know, did I make an agreement with the client? Now you're like hoping, right? Everybody is on board who needs to be on board about what next action is gonna happen with that change order. Here's how that conversation could go conversely. You're on the job site with the subcontractor, and before everybody leaves the meeting, you say to the sub, let's say it's Peter's, your plumber sub, and Peter has agreed to, based on the meeting with the client, that there's a number of fixtures that are going to get changed out to a different spec and that they're going to cost more money. And so you say to Peter, hey, Peter, when will you have that change order to me? And he says a time frame that he's going to give it to you. Maybe he says next Tuesday. And just to be clear, so you're going to give me a change order on all of the fixtures, and these are the list of things that the client said that they wanted changed. Are we on the same page about that? Peter says, yes, we're on the same page about that. That's great. And you're sure that, you know, you can do that. Like, that's realistic for you to get to me on Tuesday, because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to, if it's Wednesday, it's fine. I just don't want to make an agreement with the client that says Tuesday. Peter says, yep, no, for sure. And so, not to be a pain, but like, is it Tuesday noon or Tuesday at the end of the day? Again, I got to, you know, keep my agreement with the client. And Peter says, I'll have it to you by noon on Tuesday. And I'll have this, all of this fleshed out for you in the change order. That's awesome. Great. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it. Right. So do you guys hear the distinction of, I just got a specific agreement that's measurable, that clearly he's the person that's accountable for it. I asked him if it was realistic, right? And also time driven. When you start to do that with your team, and I use that example as a subcontractor, to work with an employee, if you're in a meeting with somebody, and I'm actually going to show you this meeting sheet that's kind of cool. So I have this meeting agenda sheet that I have made up. I've shared this with a lot of clients over the years, and I use this in every meeting that I go into, where I've got who's in the meeting, and then what are we going to talk about? Because meetings waste a lot of time in people's lives. So there's a clear agenda that's been set. And as we're going through the meeting, I record, okay, who's said they were going to do what, and then what's going to be done. And then at the end of the meeting, I sit down with this and I go, okay, when is that going to be done? Now, I want to caution us about this when thing. So first of all, this is a very powerful tool. That's a great way to have people take more accountability for specific results. It's a way to get out of that loop of people, you know, you tell somebody to do something, they don't do it, or people make agreements and they don't keep them. An important thing to understand is that as human beings, our natural inclination is to want to keep our agreements. So when you can get somebody to make a specific agreement, it will most likely have them keep that agreement. Now, it's not guaranteed all the time, right? But when you keep agreements, we tend to keep our agreements that are explicit much more than the ones that are implied or expected of us. An example of this is when you're, well, I think I gave you a good enough example of it, but the one caution I would have for you is this about it. I tend to be a strong personality. And those of us who are business owners, managers, those of us with strong personalities have a tendency to make requests that are more like demands than actual requests. So one of the things that I recommend is that you be patient with this process of getting people to, letting people make agreements for you, with you that are realistic. Because I notice people want to be a yes to me. They probably want to be a yes to you too, right? They want to say yes because they want to please you. They want to make you happy. But sometimes it's not the most realistic and it's not the right answer to have given you. And so this takes some patience, I will say, to get into the habit of making smart agreements and setting smart goals with your team, because people want to be a yes to you. And when you do this and you do this consistently, you're going to find that your team starts to take more ownership in a whole new level, because this is the thing that will really help you start to produce more consistent results with them and have them keep their agreements with you. So before I transition to the next one, so those are the three of the key things. Cynthia said, will the form be available? Yes. So one of the gifts that I want to give you today for being on the webinar is two things. I'm going to send you this agreement form for you to be able to use within your business. And then I'm also going to send you an outline for how to write position agreements. So I'm going to send you 6 steps to writing great position agreements that will walk you through all of the steps that I gave you today. Yeah, so somebody else wanted will the form be available? Yes. Yeah, you're welcome, Walt.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, does that make sense to you though? If you guys just like put something into the chat, like, is all this starting to make sense to you in terms of the whole, like when I hold people to account for specific and measurable, right? Those are a lot of things that we're talking about we're talking about specific, measurable, and we're talking about getting agreement. That's like a whole game changer in terms of how you engage with your team. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, Brian says makes total sense. Walt says yes. Yeah, cool. All right, so a couple of things that I'm gonna recap where we've been, and then I'm gonna talk about where is there a next possibility for you to take what you've learned here today to the next step. So we've talked about get clear on the results that you want people to produce, write a clearly defined position agreement, unlike what I did with Beth. Get clear agreement on those position agreements so that you get that buy-in and that they own it with you and it's not just this document that you produced. And then create a system for managing agreements within your business, because you're going to find that when you do this consistently, you're going to get people to follow through a lot more, follow through better, do what they say they're going to do, and that you're going to find that people will keep more agreements. So all of this is a start, right? It's a beginning to start to set the tone for how do you create a culture of accountability, where build a team that takes ownership and build a team where people start to keep their agreements with each other. But then if you could also, if we talked about what's like the next step, right? And I talked about my client, Paul, whose like hair was on fire all the time because people were constantly coming at him. And I see this a lot with people is there's this constant sense of being a firefighter and having to be in crisis mode all the time. And we've talked about one of the steps for getting out of that But what if we could talk about something else that would actually help you reclaim your time and energy and get out of the whole I have to be a firefighter all the time mode? Would that be helpful to you guys? Would you guys like to learn more about that? Just type something in the chat. So Blake says yes, Barbara says yes. Brian says absolutely. Great, Walt says yes. Please, okay, let's go, good. So what if you could, in the next 6 weeks, without needing to have a degree in management, hire superstars, or even leave your office, if you could build your dream team? That is a possibility. So I've got this course that I wrote that is based on this body of work that I did in my business, the body of work that I've been doing with clients all these years. And it takes what we've talked about today and expands it to the next level in terms of being able to take the tools and then expand those tools, and then even take it a step further where you're in the habit and learning how to manage for results within your team as a manager and a leader. So it's all about how do you, so the idea behind the course is how do you have a team that is engaged and proactively self-manages? Huge piece of it. Improve your leadership and management skills. The course will help you do that and will give you the steps for being able to do that. It'll help you know how to stop chasing the details and start managing for results. And it's also going to let you reclaim your time and energy. It's like my client, Paul, and I could tell you story after story of client like this, that when they've learned how to manage for results with their team, and they've learned how to put that structure into place where their team self-manages results, their ability to be able to be away from their business for periods of time and not have to micromanage, and to be able to have that peace of mind that the work keeps going without them, and to be able to increase their profitability too, which is the next one, has been incredible. And it's all about when you can get your team to really start to create a culture where the best people want to work, and you developing the best people, and where you're creating an environment where there's trust and alignment with your team. Because it's also part of what we talk about in the course. I talk about how do you create an environment where feedback and open, honest communication is the norm. So ultimately, here's what you could get, right? So it will let you serve more clients, make more profit, and work 25% less. And this is ultimately what we all want, right? So my question to you is, what would you do with 10 to 20 extra hours a week? I told you about my story with Beth. Actually, I would love to hear what people say about this. What would you do? Tell me, what would you do with 10 to 20 hours a week? And then I'll tell you what happened for me.
You want them to dream
Yeah,
about
type something in the chat.
dream about their dream team?
Fish more. I like that. What else? Brian says fish more. Michael says sleep, go skiing, said, I think that was Jack. Cool. Read more books, said Diane. Mountain biking, said Eric. William said personal enrichment. Nice. Chat said, oh, these are going so fast.
Self-care and play with the kids, time with the family, spend more time with the kids, learn to golf, enjoy family time, start exercising, family time, get work done on my own home instead of everyone else's.
Those glasses are really working, Kyle.
Start a work-life balance instead of work.
Nice. Those are great, you guys. I have to tell you, when I did this so thank you for sharing that. When I did this with my business, when I started to make this shift with Beth, I went from working 60 hours a week to working 35 hours a week. And in that time, I was able to spend a whole lot more time with my son, to be more of a mom to him. And I was able to actually, in that time, I also wrote a cookbook that I wrote with my mom of family recipes. And that was something that I'd really wanted to do for years. So, like you, it's like, gives us that ability to be able to spend time doing the things that we love with the people that we care about. And that's ultimately why we became business owners in the first place, or managers. Like, we wanted to be able to have that freedom, and we wanted to be able to make that contribution, but also feel like we have a life in the process. And what I teach in this course will give you access to being able to do all of those things. So the Build Your Dream Team course is a 6-week live 75-minute interactive training sessions that I deliver on Thursdays at 9 a.m. And in addition to that, there are 6 live half-hour interactive coaching sessions. And each of those sessions are open-ended. You come with your questions, whether it's about the course or something about management or leadership. You bring your questions, we talk about them. And what you'll learn is what it is that motivates people, how to get consistent results from your team, and how to make feedback the norm within your company. And you're going to learn how to create a team and build a team of A players. And what you get. So let's talk a little bit about what you get in the course, because you really do get a whole bunch of stuff. You're going to get a system that I've created for being able to produce consistent results. And again, this is the stuff that I've been implementing with clients for 25 years. So there's a lot of tools and resources that I've developed specifically for the construction and interior design industry. That's been the focus of my work for all these years. So let me tell you a little bit more about what's included. I've got an exclusive Facebook group page where just the members of the training are in there, and it's a great opportunity to share ideas, bounce ideas off of each other. I will look at it every day and also give you feedback and input. So as you're working through course materials, you can have a place to be able to speak and talk with a community of people who are in that with you. You'll have lifetime access to the material in the training sessions and recordings. And there's a special training portal, membership portal that you have access to that's got your exclusive login so you can track your progress as you're going through the course. And then there's a number of bonuses that are included. So the first bonus I include is 25 pre-written position agreements. And these position agreements are like the one I showed you. They're all specific to the industry, and that's valued at $24.97. And then bonus number 2 is my manager's hiring toolkit. And that toolkit was written specifically to address this issue people are facing right now around the challenge of hiring people. And so I created this separate course that's a 6 training videos and course materials that you can use starting as soon as you register for the course right now to help you in finding, recruiting, and hiring great teams. And the third one bonus is a bidding and close rate and backlog tracking worksheet that I've created that's helps clients, helps you as a business owner be able to see where you're headed in revenue before you get there. So it's a really key metrics for being able to manage your revenue and profitability. The fourth bonus I'm including is a business health assessment, and this is where you can work with your team to assess where are we strong and where do we have weaknesses in our business and where do we want to focus to make improvement and increase our maybe processes. And the fifth bonus is my book called The Profit Bleed, How Managing Margin Can Save Your Contracting Business. I wrote this book specifically for the contracting industry to help you become more profitable. And it's a really nice complement to the Build Your Dream Team course because it speaks a lot to what do you want to pay attention to, what are the key places to keep your finger on the pulse in your business to produce a consistent profit. Those are all the things that are included. It's 100% satisfaction guaranteed. So if you complete the course and you complete the coursework and you find that you have not gotten value, you don't feel like you're more effective as a manager and a leader, I'm happy to refund you 100% of your money. I believe and I know, and I've seen this material work so well for people for so many years. I have that much confidence in it. So it's a little bit of a, no risk investment on your part. So you're probably wondering about the price, right? So it's 4 easy payments of $597 or 1 payment of $997. So Kyle, I think, is putting into the chat the URL. So if you want to go click on Build Your...
And I just had to correct the 1 payment number, $1997.
Yes, 1 payment of $19. Oh, in the chat.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No, you had said a different number, so I was just correcting you.
Oh, did I say 18?
You said $997. You were given a big deal.
Oh, I was. Oh, thanks, Kyle. It's $1997. Yeah, so 4 payments of $597, 1 payment of $1997. So the total training plus the bonuses, all those bonuses I offer you, is worth $5,800. And if you act today, you can get $100 off as a thank you for being here in the webinar by just putting in the code 100 off when you register at buildyourdreamteam.com. I'm sorry, buildyourdreamteam.org. And just to recap, here's all of what you get. You get those 6 75-minute live training sessions, 6 1/2-hour laser coaching calls that you can bring any issue to that's related to managing your team, managing results, those 25 pre-written position agreements, my signature staff review system, tools for hiring and onboarding, lots of other tools and resources, and that bid and sales tracking worksheet, the private Facebook group, lifetime access to the training, and 100% satisfaction guaranteed. So you have a few options, and I'm happy to hang out here on the line and answer any questions that you may have. But just to recap for you, if you act before midnight, you can get this $100 off. So you have to register before midnight though. So if you just put in the code 100 off when you register, you can pay only $18.97 for the course, or you could still take the option of the 4 payments of $597. Either way, you're still getting a value of $5,800 for everything that I'm including in the course. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm going to put this screen up so that you can take a look at it, but I'll stay on here and I'll ask any questions. Kyle, do we have questions from people?
Yeah, there's one that a couple people asked, so I'll just summarize it. When you don't get the results you expect, how would you handle that? Another way of saying it is, it all makes sense, but what if employees don't follow through on agreements?
Well, the thing that how I look at when you don't follow agreements is I'd first look at how I made that agreement. And then I would look at what's the issue with the employee. Is it, so people fail for some basic reasons. Either they lack competency, they lack capacity, or they lack desire, or they lack clearly defined results. And so each one of those lacks competency means they're not skilled to do the job. Lacks capacity means they've got way too much on their plate and they made an agreement that they shouldn't have made. It could be that it was a jerky promise. The third one is they lack desire. If you have somebody who lacks desire, they probably shouldn't be on your team. It means that they don't want to be there. The fourth one is, was it clear in terms of, did you define the criteria, again, back to the position agreement, did you find the criteria for the result? Did you make a smart agreement with them on that agreement? Sometimes what I notice a lot of times, it's just that people make what I call jerky promises. In other words, they made an agreement that they couldn't really keep. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that did nicely. Then kind of another question is, what time frames do you manage agreements in? Kind of real time or kind of intervals? Are you checking in with key team members once a month, every couple of weeks? What have you found there?
So what I would say about agreements is that there should, when I use that meeting agreement worksheet, so the very first thing that I look at when I go into a meeting, we start with what are the agreements we made last time we met, and how are we doing with managing and keeping those agreements? Did it get done? So every meeting begins with that worksheet. And I would say that there's got to be that cycle of, and that's how part of the building the muscle of building a culture of accountability and ownership is where you're consistently having people report results back to you. Again, that's really a key, that you're not chasing.
Yeah. And that word you're using, a culture. Cultures don't happen immediately, but I'm building a culture that is based on accountability, SMART goals, measuring things. What gets measured gets improved. And as I was listening to you go through this position agreement, I would say if you pulled up the position agreements, the job descriptions for so many people on this call, it is very much task-based. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. It is it's a simple but very elegant shift and mental change to realize I am managing towards results. And it sounds like it's a simple thing, but it is an elegant thing, and something that most people, like one of the guys said, light bulb. I think that was even a light bulb as I was listening to it, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Cynthia asked, does your bidding closing module on the Build Your Dream Team course include any sales training?
No, not by itself. But that might be a fun, like half-hour session to do. There's
Oh, and we're
instructions
doing a bonus right now, Vicky. If Cynthia
I'm just
wants a
going,
little
"Oh,
sale,
I'll do a
a
bonus.
little,
It comes with really clear instructions, but that actually would be a very fun, I'd love to do that. So yeah, I would definitely throw that in.
I was just going to throw
training on that. Yeah.
Sure. I was going to throw my hat in the ring and say it comes with a bonus sales training session by yours truly.
Oh, Kyle, I like that. Kyle is
Absolutely.
a master at marketing and sales. So that would be, will you really throw that in?
Absolutely.
Ooh, that'd be good, guys.
Ooh.
Kyle's great. Yeah. Kyle's a master at that.
So those are the questions I have. If anybody else has any that they want to chime in, otherwise I think we kind of hit the closing stretch here.
Yep, we are at the hour. We're 5 minutes over. I apologize for being 5 minutes over. I'm happy to hang and answer any questions, though, that anyone has. You're very welcome. Thanks for being here, you guys. You're welcome. Tony, Walt, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. I've really enjoyed it. I've so appreciated your contribution and your comments and input.